Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Talking Wolves YouTube channel for the second part of the Wolves squad planning series with myself, Gully, musings from Molyneux, and Dan Butler today. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to be joined by JP, who's tied up elsewhere, but we will, in part three, ensure that you get all of the insight and targets that he's been away researching as we look to fill the gaps in the squad that we created in part one. We obviously had a kind of stopping point from the first section where we discussed all the whys and wherefores of the likely departures within the squad, which left a kind of skeleton of a team that we needed to then flesh out with some new additions. And here's the exciting part, I guess. We're going to talk about a few players that myself, Dan, and then subsequently JP have all pulled together as we've kind of taken on a bit of a, you know, football manager almost come to life kind of role with researching some players and seeing how they can fit into Vitor Pereira's squad for the start of next season. Given that it's very pertinent to be talking about recruitment at this moment in time, there's been a lot of news this week about the departure of Matthew Hobbs from the sporting director position. And I thought it'd be really, really important to just touch on that as we kind of walk into setting up this conversation, Dan. First of all, I guess Matthew Hobbs. Any thoughts on the job he did during his tenure?
Yeah, I think it can be summed up in a couple of different ways. I think he sort of nailed his colours to the mast with O'Neill, and that might have done for him ultimately in terms of just how sort of where his decision making was and whether they trusted him after that. But I think you look at some of the ingoings and the outgoings that we've had since he's been in situ, and I don't think you can say he did a bad job whatsoever. I think you look at the way we've tapped into the South American market. It's something we've not exploited ever before. And I think you look at probably the two best signings outside of Cunha, obviously, in the last couple of years that have come through the doors, been João Gomez and Andre. And you'd probably have to make a case that Hobbs has been a pretty influential part of those two guys arriving. I think for just those two alone, you can say he's done a pretty good job. There'll be parts that we didn't see to his role, and obviously there'll be stuff that we'd never find out about what the relationship was like between him and the powers that be. But I think on balance, yeah, I can't make a case that he's done a bad job whatsoever.
Yeah, I think you can see that he very much came from a player scouting position as opposed to an overarching football club background, right? So you saw straight away the success that he had with unearthing a few gems. Obviously, it all started with Max Kilman, didn't it? In terms of he really hung his hat on him and made sure that he brought him to the club. I think the quote he gave was that he'd put up the money out of his own wages almost, and he'll make sure that gets paid back tenfold, and that's exactly what happened, right? So, I for a player was clearly um, very keen on that, and the South American kind of influence, I think, was driven by him as well, and the amount of business that we've done in that area. Um, Still waiting for Enzo Gonzalez to really blossom, but we'll see how that one goes as well. But when you then get into the weeds of his management of the managers and his relationship with them and how that's kind of gone, um, I think it'd be unfair to label his decision to appoint Gary O'Neill a failure because that first season, I think, was in general terms a success, given the way the situation unfolded with Lopetegui. I think the decision to then commit beyond, I think he already had a 3-year contract when he first signed, to then obviously commit even further to that, having had the dip towards the end of that season and then the really, really difficult start to the season that we had this time round. So there's obviously a load of strands to that role, and there's going to be a new man in situ. We know who is really the guy who is running the show, but a man called Domenico Tetti, who worked recently with Vitor Pereira at Al Shabab. I've done my kind of basics in terms of research. The last time he was involved in a senior club at the top level was at Sampdoria back in 2013. So he's had quite a way away from elite level football, you'd say. Any any
Yeah, yeah.
any any knowledge there, Dan, in terms of Dominique Arteta at all? No?
You are talking to the wrong man if it comes to that sort of knowledge. Yeah, I mean, you'd be really scraping the barrel coming to me for that sort of thing. Yeah, I tweeted saying it was jobs for the boys. It was a little bit tongue in cheek, a little bit sort of reactionary to what was going on. Um, I've got some bigger picture thoughts on the sort of restructuring as a whole that I guess we'll get into in the next couple of minutes or so. But I don't love it. It's probably a good way to start things off.
Yeah, look, the the news has been spun as the power lying now with Vitor Pereira, which I think the January transfer window is obviously the only one that's been presided over Vitor to this point, and I think there was a bit of a sliding doors moment within it where, if we all remember, Manu Silva was due to sign, and that was kiboshed at the last minute by him joining Benfica. And I mean, obviously, he's a Portuguese player. Whether that meant he was a Vitor-led signing or a Mendes-led deal, that's probably quite likely in that instance. But having not got that through the door, we then went on this kind of mad scramble to try and bring in another midfielder who Vitor had obviously highlighted as a need. I'll always go back to the Forest game as the one where I think he really highlighted the issues that we had. Tommy Doyle came in, back of midfield, who had killed in transition, all that sort of stuff. And he talked about bringing an athlete in. Names like Vladimir Brashko, Johnny Cardoso, who I see has been linked to Atletico Madrid, I think today.
40 odd mil today, yeah.
From what I saw of him in the Conference League as well, looks a good player.
Yeah.
Hidemasa Morita from Sporting in Portugal, and obviously we end up with signing Marshall Monetzi. And I guess, to my mind, if you look at the players that Hobbs brought to the club, I don't think Monetzi is the kind of player that he would have pushed to come into the side. So I think it's very much a Vitor-led situation there. We've obviously had the success we've had. Agbadu, absolutely. If that was, from what people suggest, that might have been on the cards in the summer, and the club decided against it. Mm-hmm. If Vitor really drove that one home, obviously kudos to him on that. And then Nasajiga was probably again a club signing as opposed to a Vitor-led signing as well. Do you think those instances have kind of led to some sort of power shift, and which has ultimately led to the demise of Matt Hobbs in the boardroom?
I think there's every chance. It's such a small sample size. It's effectively two transfers. So there's Agbadu, which, as you say, might have happened in the summer, but which didn't, and it happened to happen in the January window instead. And then there's Munetsi that came in after that. My issue is, and this is a bigger picture thing, and I've been trying to find the right way to sort of tweet this without getting just pelted. And I'm fully aware it's not popular and it doesn't play into the general sentiment around the club. So I've always been, or wanted to be careful about how I word it. But this sort of deifying that we've had, or the fan base has sort of committed to, of Vitor since he's come in, I think has played a role in that shift in power. I think the club do listen to what happens outside of the club, so what the fans think and the general vibe around the city as well. And I think they see that he is popular and that in general, the fans seem to have taken to him really quickly, and vice versa as well. He's made a massive effort to ingratiate himself within the city, going out for pints, whatever it might be. But I do always worry when there's that much power concentrated in one person whose expertise, I replied to someone on Twitter saying this, but whose expertise is on pitch matters, for example, and who is likely to prioritise short-term results to maintain their own job over possibly the longer-term goals of the club itself. I feel like that's quite a slippery slope, and it might well be a live by the sword, die by the sword situation. So for those who are completely convinced by Vitor, as we should all be to an extent, who do believe he should have this level of power, they might well find out that if this doesn't go right in, let's say, 6 to 12 months, the club are able to turn this back on him and say, well, we've given you everyone you've wanted. We've brought your man in from Al Shabaab. We've done this. We've done that. We've effectively recruited based on what you've said, and it's not gone right. So there's no other person to blame for this going wrong at this point. And it just worries me when we go down that path, because when Hobbs was in situ, we had something of a structure at least. It meant we could tap into markets like the French League, for example, or Brazil, or wherever it might be in South America. And it feels a little bit like we might be pushing ourselves into a corner here, and it could really go one of two ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of both on the same page with this regarding, like you say, all the power sitting in one person's hands. Who, and I think that you put it really well there, is going to prioritize the preservation of their job, which in turn will mean good things for the club, but ultimately that's likely to be, especially when you look at Vitor Pereira's general length of term at any club he's been at, 18 months to 2 years probably at the best.
Yeah,
is what we
at
could
a
hope
push,
for.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, if we're trying to build some sort of dynasty, it doesn't feel like the right way to go. I felt, I mean, I'm being really, really cynical here. I felt that when the funds dried up, Mendes and Gestifute were nowhere to be seen. They gave the keys to Hobbs and said, "Look, can you pull a few rabbits out of the hat because we ain't got no money?" Now that we're on a more sound financial footing, look who's
They're
popped up
back.
again. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Mendes Mafia has returned, and look, that's an incredibly cynical point of view. I appreciate that, but
I'm glad you said it, because I was worried to make my point. So
look,
the fact you've gone down there, I'm happy.
look, I've committed my thoughts to paper already on a blog on the Talking Wolf site, which I've shared with people, and it it never quite feels to me like there would ever be a vested interest in Bosun, George Mendes, etc., pushing Wolves into the upper echelons of the league, because fundamentally our club is there to feed players up to the big fish, and we
Yeah,
know that George
absolutely.
Mendes will have his fingers in pies with the likes of Barcelona. We know moves like Nelson Semedo coming to the club at the cost that he did was to do Barcelona a favour, to dig them out of a financial hole. We know he's linked with Chelsea. Pedro Neto goes there. The Saudi project, obviously, massive, massive amounts of funds available to line Mendes' pocket as well as ours. We'll happily admit that, but it still takes away from us really building a foundation to go out and potentially become your Brightons, your Bournemouth, as everyone wants to kind of
Mm-hmm.
point out, as I'm sure frustrates you more than anyone being a South Coast native.
Oh, it
Um,
kills me.
yeah, but we'll leave it at that. I don't want to delve too much into that because I'm sure people will be coming for us. But
I
just
think we could
remember,
do a whole other podcast on
we
it, to be
could,
fair.
we 100% could. I just remember who was pushing João Gomez to Leon when we were trying to sign him, and how João Gomez stood firm. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
a pertinent point to
Yeah,
make. But we'll
yeah.
go straight into some of the work that we've been doing in. It's actually been 4 weeks since we last recorded, so we have kind of let you guys down a little bit in terms of timing, but we've just been trying to make the stars align somewhat. I'm going to share my screen very quickly on the state of play from the last episode, which was this kind of bare bones squad, lots of holes in it, not necessarily full of quality either. But you can see here that defensively we're relatively well covered. All the goalkeepers in here, aside from Sam Johnston. Biggest issue probably being the amount of homegrown players in here. We've still got the likes of Ait Nouri, who we know is imminently set to join Manchester City. And then the number 10 positions, just totally bare bones. Strand Larson and Kalajdzic as potential starting nines for us. So we took that, we ran with it, and we decided to bring about some change. And I'm going to just kind of kick off here and share with you my squad. So just so everybody knows, Dan, myself, and JP, we haven't discussed anything regarding the players that we've targeted and the squads that we put together. There may be some overlap, but we've definitely not coordinated on making sure we're picking players that the other ones picked or anything like that. But without further ado, I'm going to kick us off with my incomings to start with. So I've gone with 6 new signings. Now, I don't think that is excessive. I think that's probably the right kind of number in terms of being able to integrate them into a squad and still, not have too much upheaval. But we do need numbers as well. We absolutely need numbers. I'm going to work through this kind of from back to front in terms of where these guys play within the pitch. And Ryan Aitnuri, his departure being a very pertinent point to kind of bring this one up as well. You can see top left of my screen, Callum Doyle. There's a lot of consternation about the fee that we've received for Ryan Aitnuri, and much like with Mateus Nunes, would there be a little bit of a kickback from City to kind of sweeten the deal a little bit in some shape or form? I described this in another WhatsApp group as perhaps we can do a Doyle-esque move, and there couldn't be a more Doyle-esque move than bringing in Callum Doyle. I quite like that one. For this wasn't something that I envisaged actually doing until I started doing a bit of the research around how I wanted to tackle the squad building, and the homegrown factor obviously plays a part here as well. But Callum Doyle, he's had, I think, 3 seasons of really, really good championship experience. He's been at Coventry, Leicester, played at Norwich last season. Good age. He's going to turn 22 in October, and he's a very, very classy left-footed centre half who was in the 90th percentile for progressive passes of all centre halves within the championship last season. So, obviously of good stock will just be a very solid footballer you can kind of trust, apart from maybe Carlos Forbes, Man City kind of graduates in terms of their ability to handle themselves and play football at the top level. He's mobile enough. I don't think he's necessarily rapid, but he's the kind of player who could come in, not start within the team in the season, knowing that Totti Gomez is kind of featured in that left centre half spot and has that name on has his shirt, had the shirt there in many respects. But once you get into the really busy period of the season, you could swap him out. You give him that experience. He's got a lot of games under his belt and added extra quality down the left hand side, which I think we've spoken about previously. Where when you're losing Aitnuri, Totti Gomez might actually kind of struggle a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I've referenced a couple of times since JP said it in the first podcast, where losing Aitnuri means that Totti loses an outball straight away, and just having someone who's quite assured on the ball, they're never going to replicate what Aitnuri can do. I mean, there might be 5 players on the planet who can sit in at left back or left wing back and actually do that role of picking up the ball and riding 3 challenges and progressing the ball. So you're never going to actually replicate it, but you can find, it's that money ball thing, isn't it? It's about replacing it in the aggregate, and it's finding a way of progressing that ball safely and securely without that unicorn sat at left back that's able to do it for you.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's seen anything of Doyle. Genuinely, like, really, really comfortable on the ball, and at a push, you could probably play him at left wing back. I know he's played at left back quite a bit when he's had his spells in the Championship at Leicester specifically. I think he played a lot there when they won the title. But yeah, I think he's a really good prospect. So Man City, if you don't mind, knocking the price down on that one a bit, given we've handed over one of our best players to you at a cut price, that'd be
just do us a solid.
Yeah. I think they're one of those clubs that actually they want to be seen as quite amiable in terms of doing business with them. I don't think they tend to ruffle too many feathers. So who knows? Maybe we will. Next one, Kyle Walker-Peters. I think this is the most no-brainer deal you could possibly do, based on the fact that he's a free transfer. We've lost Nelson Semedo. He's 28, I think. Really, really experienced, homegrown, covers both wing-back positions with ease. He's not necessarily going to set the world alight, I don't think, but I think he's capable of. The one thing I always said with Semedo, you can give him the ball out on his own on the wing and he will retain it. I think Walker-Peters has that about him in terms of being able to wriggle out of difficult situations, just being sensible. I'm not saying he's necessarily as good a 1v1 defender. I recall actually in the home game against us last season when we scored in the first minute, I think he lost the ball for us to score the first goal. But
we just collectively forget that, though.
Yeah, but you spent the rest of the game getting into really good positions, being really solid on the ball. Part of that Russell Martin team where you have to have a lot of possession, right? And he was a key component within that. I think he has featured as a right centre half at certain times as well in the back three. So if I know Vitor likes, as an attacking change, he liked to do that with bringing Rodrigo on as a wing back and slotting Semedo in his back three. So he can feature in that regard as well. But I feel like this is a fairly self-explanatory one.
So we've gone. I'm obviously not going to go into any spoilers for mine yet, but we've gone very similar routes for how we've deemed that right wing back / right back position
Okay.
to be important. We've come to different conclusions, but I agree. It's just got to be someone that is dependable enough that you can rely on them for probably 20 to 25 of the 38 games we're going to play in the Prem next season, but isn't going to be so demanding that they expect to play every single minute and start stunting the likes of Gomez and Lima's progression in the team.
Yeah.
I think the last thing you want to do is, splash 20, 25, 30 mil on that position and then just be hoarding talent that doesn't ever get a chance to really play. So that sort of player in that mould of a Walker Peters, or who I'm going to suggest in about 20 minutes time, hopefully sort of fits that bill as well. But yeah, agree completely. It's that sort of direction we've got to go in.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, fundamentally as a club, we can't afford to spend that much money on a wing back anyway, really. That sort of money needs to be reserved for the difference makers within the team. And while Nuri is someone who could obviously do that, we've nurtured that into him. If we went and spent 25, 30 million on a right back again, like we did with Semedo, which again, pinch of salt with the Mendes factor in that, you're tying up a lot of funds which we don't have in a position that might not win you games fundamentally.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll move on to a central midfield choice. We spoke about this, and my bonus kind of need for this was to have a left footer in there. Amir Richardson, who I'm not 100% on the feasibility of signing Amir Richardson personally, because he's had 1 year of Fiorentina, having left Reims from obviously teammate of Agbadou and Manetzi, which I'm sure would be a real little bonus if he was to join us as well. But he is a really, really talented guy who's not had a lot of joy getting minutes in Italy. I think he's paid more in the Conference League he's tended to play than in the Serie A actually, and partially because I think they've got a fairly solid bunch of midfielders in there like Nicola Fagioli, Mandragora, I think. D.
Mm-hmm.
Marston, feel free to talk.
I was literally thinking the exact same thing. We're going to get hauled up on by someone here. I know who it is as well.
Yeah, he's more than welcome to chip in on this. But Richardson, I saw him at Reims before he moved to Fiorentina. £9 million they signed him for, so it was a relatively low fee for what is, I think, you're getting into kind of unicorn status here. He's like, I don't want to damn him with faint praise. He's like Philip Billing, but way better on the ball. And he has that. He's a bit of a ballerina, despite being 6'5", which is a bit freakish. Like, he's the son of two basketball players, as it happens. His dad's a former NBA player called Michael J. Richardson, who played in France towards the end of his career, which is when he met his wife and then had Amir, and Moroccan international as well now. So yeah, he only started 15 games across all competitions last season, and I just wonder if there's a cheeky kind of pull you could have to say, whilst you're not going to start every week with Andre and João Gomez, you're that extra kind of, not X factor, but slightly different, quirky option we could have to change things around for us.
I remember you saying that a left footer was one of those things that you personally just wanted to have in there because you liked the balance of the right and the left foot in there at some point in the midfield. I think we harked on about the days of Milias and centre midfield and said since then, Milias, Dave Jones, at one point we were a little bit too left footed and now we're really lacking them in the middle of the park. I guess, I'm not familiar with him. I think it's probably down to like you said, the lack of minutes. So in terms of a profile coming onto the pitch, if he comes on in the last 30, is it because we're chasing a game? Is it because we're trying to see it out? How do you see him sort of slotting in that way?
He's the kind of guy, he's not necessarily got the goal record to back it up right now, but because of his size and his ability to cover ground, he's an 8 who can get on the end of things in the box, but has that cultured left foot where he can pick a pass. He can give it him in tight spaces and stuff as well. And just a rotation option to play in the pivot, he can do that not necessarily a sitter, because I think if you've got the ability to cover around, you don't want to discipline players too much. Let them roam free. It's like someone like João Gomez. You don't want him sitting as a six, because he has that natural tendency to go out and bite into challenges, and
He wants to chase the ball, yeah.
you don't want to rein him in. And I think Richardson would be the same. But yeah, I think there's just a few kind of tools in his armory that he could probably lend itself to Wolves and be really good. And he's only 23 as well, so again, good age to come in and really
That
develop.
sort of age profile, yeah, is exactly where we want to be. I think definitely.
Okay, cool. Moving into probably the most pertinent point of our transfer targets here, the forward line. We have been decimated in terms of the likelihood of who's going to be going and who has already gone, and the reliability of some of the players that we've kind of got there as options as well. Amari Hutchinson, I think, is again kind of just comes from that good stock. He was a Chelsea and Arsenal youth player, I think, at one point. Ipswich, when they played us in the League Cup last season, the season before last, and they beat us 3-2. He started. I don't think he was quite embedded within the team at that point, but he scored. He might have got an assist. I mean, Daniel Bentley's kind of Teflon gloves didn't necessarily help in that regard, but looked a really good player. And I think even in that chaotic game that we had at home when Gary O'Neill lost his job, Hutchinson really, really stood out to me as a player. You could just kind of handle the ball, make things happen, turn away from pressure. For me, he's the Pablo Sarabia with that extra bit of dynamism and the ability to take on a man and have a bit of extra pace that stops Sarabia from being a really good player for us. And yeah, I think he may be a little bit expensive for what he is and the numbers that he produced, and whether he thinks, but I do think he will, within the next 18 months, 2 years, be a really, really solid Premier League player again, producing at a good level. Even if it's not top level, I think he'd be just a really good player for a mid-table side. So yeah, I don't know what have you seen much of him? Or...
Yeah, so he was on my long list, funnily enough, and I've gone a similar route in terms of a left footer in one of those positions behind that centre forward from a relegated team, but I've got a slightly different one. So we've had the same thought process again, but just come to a slightly different conclusion. I think with Hutchinson, the biggest thing that stands out to me is just I think there's a level of explosiveness there that we don't have going forward at the moment. If you look at the two that are going to play or have played behind Larson, it's been Cunha, it's been Munetsi, and obviously Cunha can't be factored in the discussion anymore. He's not our problem, but Munetsi is not going to get on the ball, drive inside, and have a go from just outside the edge of the box, for example. Whereas you're going to see Hutchinson do that, and there are probably going to be times where he frustrates you because he's going to have a dig from 25 yards when really releasing it onto someone else is probably the smart decision. But there will also be times where we're breaking and all of a sudden he's that incisive, almost Pedro Neto light, where we've got someone who just drives at a back line that isn't quite in its normal structure. And he'll look like one of the best players in the league when he's in that sort of game state, if you like.
Yeah,
I think it'd be quite exciting.
I think he is. I think he's one. I call them shift and shoot players where he'll be able to get a yard on a man. He's not necessarily going to dribble around 2 or 3 at a time, but he'll be able to get a yard, get a shot off. We've lacked players like that, I think, over the years, and we really could, because like against low blocks, that's the kind of thing where if you're snapping shots away without much space and stuff and getting something Fabio Silva does very well, as it happens. Which they're the kind of things that can really change a bad kind of unlikely situation into a potential goal or a potential situation that you can take advantage of, right? So,
and it can bail out quite a bad attack sometimes as well. Where if you've got someone who can just, like you say, shift and shoot, all it takes is your centre forward gambling on the keeper spilling one of those, and you got yourself what is basically a tap in from 2-3 yards, whatever it might be. So you will get those occasions where he bails you out of what's become quite a stagnant attack against a low block, like you say, and something comes out of nothing.
Yeah, definitely. Next one, Abdallah Sima. This is my kind of wild card shout, which I don't think anybody would have considered in any way. He's actually a Brighton player who's been on loan at Stade Brestois, most commonly known as just Brest for obvious reasons. But he he had a long spell at Rangers as well last season. I kind of came across him there because I was trying to keep tabs on Fabio at the time, which wasn't necessarily going that well. And the title
We're all
race,
guilty of it, don't worry.
yeah, he will come good eventually. He will.
He will.
The title race that season when Fabio went to Rangers was really, really tight. And Sima, who has a sketchy injury record, which will hold him back in this regard, and something that we obviously need to consider, was the one player that Rangers were missing, who that the fans will say stopped them from getting over the line with the title. He's a bit of a chaos merchant in the sense that he's quick, he's strong, he plays kind of across the front line. 6'3", you know, capable of just running beyond the last line and making trouble and causing defenders problems, which I don't think we've got within the team at this moment in time. We really need someone to do that, and I see him as a squad player, not necessarily to come in and start every week. He's played this season in the Champions League, scored 12 goals in all competitions, in the equivalent of 21.490s, which is not on record to be, sniffed at by any means at all. It's just that ability to play every single week and play games, which I think has held him back a little bit. But if you're not starting him every week, if you're bringing him on for the last 20 minutes and all that kind of thing, I think he's a guy who can come in and just make an impact in games, regardless of what kind of situation he's in. I'll get on to kind of who I've kind of shed from my squad in a minute, but he's the kind of player who needs to have who would have the impact that I think people want Hwang to have. Hwang isn't necessarily going to play every week. He might be playing off a striker. He might play as a 9, but he'll come in and do stuff and cause problems for defenders. I think Sim is the kind of guy who will just occupy people, and you're just not going to enjoy playing against him. Wins 3.2 aerials per 90, and I don't think that's necessarily considered as, he's not considered a target man or anything like that, but he's very strong in the air, good finisher with his head as well, which I've seen from comps. But yeah, I just think he's got a bit of refinement lacking in his game, but when he gets a chance, he has tended to finish them. And notwithstanding the fact I'm talking about the SPL and Liga, but I think a guy who could have an impact at Premier League level, definitely.
I think as well, like I think I mentioned this in the previous pod, was when Plan A is not working, what does Plan B look like? And we haven't really had a chance to see it so far. And it'd be quite interesting to see if you're a centre back or a pair of centre backs who've been knocked about for 60 to 70 minutes by Larson, and he's having a bad day, or it's just not getting the rub of the green, whatever it is. I think the last thing you want to see is someone like Simmer, who, like you say, is chaos merchant, who's gonna just put it on you for a half hour and force you to sort of just deal with them physically first and foremost. I think just having that different element up top, it could be quite invaluable when you're facing different defensive setups or whatever it might be different game states. I personally haven't watched him as much. I definitely did my Fabio tracking, but I think I was so engrossed in watching his long flowing hair, see what he could do, that I couldn't watch what Sim was up to. But yeah, absolutely, he sounds like the sort of profile, and again, not too dissimilar from what I was looking at as well. So yeah, I think we're on the same wavelength here.
I think the one thing that I liked from watching him was that if he saw 10 yards of space in behind a defender and he had the ball at his feet, he would just knock it into that space and go at them. The kind of thing that just no defender wants to have to deal with, especially late in games. And it's the kind of thing, like I say, we're just lacking a little bit of that threat to really kind of bother defenders towards the end of fixtures. So that's my shout as a bit of a super sub, I think. Finally, this is my kind of top dog X factor, go and kind of be Mateus Cunha's replacement player. This is Malik Tillman from PSV. PSV is a team that scored over 100 goals this season. That it was quite a dramatic end to the season for them in terms of winning the title and stuff. But Peter Bosz put together a really, really exciting team there. And Tillman looks like one of the most interesting players, I think, within that squad. A lot of people talk about Johan Bakayoko. Well, I'm not actually that big on, to be honest, but Tillman just has that kind of aura of being a guy who just wants to get on the ball, make stuff happen, and just win games for his team. He plays actually as an eight on the left of an eight, left of a midfield three as an eight. Obviously, in the Eredivisie, where he can probably play a more forward-thinking player in that position and get away with it. But I think as that left 10, he just screams, Cunha's kind of regen basically. Has the ball in tight areas, carries the ball up the pitch, scores from distance, creates. He was on loan at Rangers as well. He's another kind of Rangers alumni. Come through at Bayern Munich, and I think he suffered from probably coming through at the same time as Jamal Musiala, which he was going to win that battle. Let's be honest. But he did have an ACL injury, which I think killed him a little bit. But PSV took the punt on the permanent signing with him. From what I understand, Bayern Munich actually still have a buyback clause of about 35 million euros on him. If we were to try and do a deal at that price, I think that's a pretty reasonable fee. It's probably a stretch for us. I don't think we're necessarily going to go out and spend that much money on too many occasions. But if Tillman was available and you came in and said to him, "You're my guy, you can go and win us games, spend a couple of years here, and you're going to be a 70-80 million pound player for another bigger Premier League team," I think that's a pretty good sell, as opposed to jumping to a bigger club straight away.
I think our track record for that now, it's painful for us because we lose our best players and they go to the bigger clubs in the league or whatever. But that track record does stand us in quite good stead now for players who do potentially, or maybe they're just a couple of years removed from the very elite of European football. We are quite a good club now to land at, and they can ply their trade for a couple of years, like you say. They can do the Nouri and they can do the 4 or 5 year stint, or it might be a Cunha sort of situation or a Nunes where, they get a year or two to showcase their talents on a good stage, and then we don't stand in their way to go to a bigger club when they got the opportunity.
So where does that leave my squad as a whole? I feel like I'm almost showboating here, to be honest, but I haven't even filled up the 25-man allocation. I've managed to get 8 homegrown players in there, which everyone says is a massive issue, and left space for two additional squad members. I don't. I mean, obviously, there's always a potential for like injury crises and stuff like that. But when I've looked at a number of players that we still got available to us in each position, I don't think I'm too concerned. We've obviously still got Sarr, Bentley, and King as the keepers. Defensively, 6 I think is probably a bit too many, but Matt Doherty is the versatile one who can go and cover at wing back and things like that. So really, there's 5 centre halves in Natajiga, Yes Mosquera, Agbadu, Callum Dawn, and Totti Gomez, which profile-wise I think is a nice mix as well. I think Mosquera could do a job as Agbadu's understudy if necessary, as well. So I've got him in there as the backup in that position specifically. And then when you're looking at the kind of middle of the pitch, Hugo Bueno comes back in. I preempted, I think, that Aït-Nouri was going to leave, so I've got Walker Peters sitting as the left wing back there. But him and Rodrigo Gomez are probably interchangeable, with Pedro Lima providing some sort of backup, and Doherty being that extra experience option. I'm appreciate this is probably unlikely to happen, but I would really keep Tommy Doyle because I don't think we've got that level of passing range within the rest of the central midfield players. So Andre and João Gomez are your first choice, but you've got Amir Richardson and Tommy Doyle as their backups. And then across the 2 number 10s, obviously quite a bit of change there. Amari Hutchinson fighting it out with Marshall Manetzi in the right 10 spot. I say fighting it out in inverted commas, but I know who I think should win that battle. And then Malik Tillman, Abdallah Sima, and Jean-Ritter Bellegarde, who again can obviously slot in as one of the midfielders as well. I think Bellegarde will still get quite a few minutes next season. And Strand Larsen, Sasha Kalajdzic, maybe hopefully being an impact player for us, with the knowledge that someone like Sima could be a number 9 as well, and probably more likely to come in and start games as opposed to Sasha. But not a bad player to have, I think, as a backup with Mateus Mane as the young understudy. But we'll leave my group of players there, and we'll hand over to Dan. Okay, so moving on to Dan's team, what have you got for us, mate?
Right, bear with me. Can you see that?
I can. Okay, interesting.
Now, it's going to be a bit rogue, this right back spot. We've gone Ainsley Maitland-Niles. He was supposed to come to us a couple of seasons ago when he was still in the midst of working out whether he thought he should be a midfielder or he should be forced back into a fullback position, which is what Arsenal wanted to do with him. And I think that did borderline irreversible damage to his reputation. However, Leon picked him up, I believe, on a free a couple of seasons ago. And actually, he sort of seems to have settled into that right back / right wing back slot now. And he's actually sort of become the player that he was supposed to be originally. He's secure on the ball, so it brings that same level of confidence when you give him it that we used to have with Semedo. So, if we need bailing out in a possession, you can give him the ball and know that it's not going to go astray. He's a confident passer. He's a progressive passer as well, which I think is an interesting thing that you can add in there. He likes going forward, which is possibly a little bit too risky for a Vitor side, but I'm intrigued to see how these wing backs get utilised without having Ignoring the side now. So there might well be scope where one of them is able to go, and he might well be the one that sort of gets licensed to do that. It's good in the tackle, possibly lacking slightly in the air, but again, I don't think that's too much of an issue because you're probably pairing him next to Doc, who we know is underrated aerially. And I just think, harking back to something we talked about earlier with you going the Walker Peters route, I think you can pick up Maitland-Niles now, who was coming to his prime. He's not going to expect to be our starting right back, right wing back for the next 3 to 4 years. So he's not going to stand in the way of Lima or Gomez. And there's a decent amount of rumbling going on that he wants to come back to the Prem anyway. So I think for a pretty cut price fee of, you'd imagine, no more than 5 to 10 mil, he sort of fits the bill.
Okay. No, this is not a name I would have thought you brought to the table, to be honest, but I can see some of the sense in it. I think when you mentioned the fact that he wanted to be a midfielder, I believe he went on loan to West Brom.
He did,
And
sadly.
yeah, was that the time when we were after him? I wonder if he rejected us on that basis. But it obviously didn't necessarily go very well for him there. And he's probably kind of just living with the fact that he maybe isn't a quality midfield option now. But in terms of Leon, I know that they seem to be having a fire sale every single summer at times, right? So it's generally quite a feasible deal to do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think player power as well comes into it, where, like I say, I think the headlines that I've read, and again, look, you never know how much trust you can put in these things, but is that he's supposed to be nostalgic, which is probably a horrible translation from a French article, but he's supposed to be nostalgic about a return to the Premier League. And I think when you take into consideration the homegrown quota as well, and as you have done for Kyle Walker-Peters as well, it just adds that extra element where he's going to be a versatile squad player that can sit in for 20, 25 games and eventually in the next couple of years give way to whoever out of Lima or Gomez has come on further out of the two of them, really.
Okay. I think he could feature across both sides as well, can he, from what I know. But,
yeah, absolutely. And I've sort of tried to have a theme here with the versatility across most of these players that I've picked. I think that's something, if you look at Munetzi's continued role in this team, I think it's the versatility that's part of the reason he stays on the side, and same with Doc. So with that in mind, I like the idea that that's one of the main threads of our transfer business this summer. I think that versatility is one and opportunistic is the other, which is what I'll come on to sort of slightly further down.
Okay, cool. Move on.
So I agree with you in the sense that we are quite well covered at centre-back. But I am going to assume that Giga and Bueno both go on loan. And I think Doc's a cult hero. I love the bloke. He's turned himself into a Wolves legend, from a dubious left back to a Wolves cult legend, whatever you want to call him. I think possibly that's a square peg in a round hole and isn't a long-term solution for that right centre-back spot. Now, if you want to make the case that Mosquera can sit there and we can have the three sort of very aggressive centre-backs in Mosquera, Agbadu and Totti, then absolutely there's a case to be made for it. But again, looking at the homegrown quota, Ahmed Hodzic should be available. And this is me going back to my recruitment piece that I did years ago, and I've just honestly chewed anyone's ear off that would actually listen to me about picking this guy up. There's now a good opportunity as he's got a couple of seasons in England under his belt. He's sort of had to deal with championship football, so big hulking strikers that you really don't want to see every week, where physically he'll now be up to speed and he still possesses most of the quality that he had on the ball as well at the time. So if you are looking to at some point transition away from the dock part of that back three, he's probably quite a good option in there to take that spot, I would say.
Yeah, totally accustomed to playing in a back three, right, as well, which obviously helps. I think what I've noticed, obviously, with Vitor's wide centre halves, he does like them to overlap on the odd occasion, and Ahmedhodzic is totally primed for that sort of thing. I think, like you say, that experience of Championship football, probably being above that level anyway. I don't think he's fitting to kind of play there. And mobility is really, really good. You know, really, really quick. I remember the day we played them at our place, the one season they were absolutely terrible in the Premier League. Pedro Neto tried to run him and he just didn't get anywhere because he was able to match him stride for stride. So he's really, really quick. From what I've read, there are some character traits that aren't necessarily that favourable with regards to Ahmedhodzic, but we won't get into that. But for sure, a player that I think could come in and straight away just slot in and do a job. I didn't touch on myself actually. The Santi Bueno, I decided to move on as well because I just think we've seen what we're going to see from him. I don't think we're ever going to see. He's had a consistent run of games this season without, setting the world alight. He's been asked to be more aggressive, and I think what you find with him then, he gives away a lot of fouls when he's trying to be, because he's not as physically imposing as like Agbadu, and he's really forcing himself to, and it doesn't come naturally to him, and he just doesn't seem like quite a natural fit. But he's fine, as a backup option. But I think, like you said, there's the ability to improve on him for sure.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would assume that centre-back's a position we desperately have to add to this summer. I just think, again, thinking along that theme of being opportunistic, and going to come on to that again further down this list, I think you can see the clubs that are ripe for the plucking this summer that are going to have to give up some of their talent, and he's probably one of them. I looked at Vinicius Souza again because I wanted to almost convince myself that I was right when I did the initial recruitment piece a couple of years ago. Just don't think he would have fit in. But Ahmedhodzic, I still think there's a place for him in this sort of squad. So settled on him.
Yeah.
And then move to left back, left wing back sort of position. This was similar to you. I preempted that Ait-Nouri would be on his way. It felt too good to be true that we'd be holding on to him for another summer. Spoiler alert, I've got us still with Hugo Bueno as well, but I'm bringing in, ideally in this football managery world, I'm bringing in Melvin Bard. Again, this theme of versatility. He has played left centre-back, he's played left-back, he's played left wing-back in France this season. Unbelievable progressor of the ball. He can pick it up similar to Ait-Nouri. He's never going to be Ait-Nouri, but similar to him. He can pick it up in his own third and he can end up on the edge of their box in a sort of serious decision-making areas and having to pick the right ball out from there. But he's also very secure in possession. He makes a lot of his passes. They're quite safe, so it's not as if he's going to be breaking the lines necessarily or finding and like spraying it across the pitch or anything like that. But you can trust him with the ball. And again, the versatility side of things, again, it's the ability to step in on the left centre back of a three, which is where he's played before, left back of a four, or in that left wing back role. it sounds bad because I think he's going to come back into the squad and probably at some point be quite important. But I just don't trust Hugo Bueno quite yet. Um, I don't think he gets through nearly enough defensive work, and I think it was like 11, 1,200 minutes he got through this season. That just, as a sample size, is not big enough for me to say, yeah, that should be our starting left back, left wing back going into this season. So um, Melvin Bard, for me, it provides competition, and he's just a slightly more mature, safer version of what we could rock up with in that position.
Yeah, player I don't know a fat lot about, to be honest. I know he's a left-sided player. How old is he?
I want to say he's 24. I will double
Okay.
check my notes, but he's not sort of threatening that 28, 29 range quite yet.
Okay. I mean, I think Liga is just a really solid base for a player that we're trying to attract and do well with, right? So we seem to be. I mean, I think is it Nice he's from? That we've been having
Yeah,
a
yeah,
look at his teammate Evan Guessant as well, apparently. So
yeah,
we must have perhaps been aware of him and watched him play as well. So no, fair shout.
yeah. I'm sticking in France, funnily enough, for the next pick. I remember one of the things that yourself and JP mentioned, I think in the previous pod was ball progression from midfield in terms of carrying it. I think we see how much emphasis Vitor puts on how press resistant his midfielders and his centre backs and whoever can be. I think he mentioned it in that podcast with Wolves the other day, where at times it looks like we should be starting an attack, but actually he wants to slow the game down. He wants to invite the opposition on because at some point there's going to be a trigger for us to play forward. And for that to be possible, he needs to have players at his disposal who can pick up the ball, be comfortable on it when they're under pressure, turn out of it, play forward when needs be. Valentin Rongier, sorry to any French speakers who might tune into the pod. I've absolutely butchered his name. Apologies. But he is every bit of that. He can pick it up from deep positions off his centre backs. He can turn out of trouble. He's almost in the mould of a João Gomez physically, where actually, weirdly enough, I went into thinking I needed someone imposing in the squad in that position. But we've got this style now of sort of quite combative, diminutive centre midfielders, and Rongier fits that bill really nicely. Gets through loads of defensive work, but at the same time, when you give him the ball, he's excellent at passing. He's progressive. It's not sideways for no reason. It is breaking the lines, finding men in between them, um, as well as picking it up and driving forward, riding a couple of challenges. Um, he's 30, I think 31, maybe at a push now. And there's talks that he's rejected his initial contract offer from Marseille. So there is scope there in terms of potentially picking up on the cheap as a result. But I just like him, again, almost similar to the Maitland-Niles shout, but with less first team minutes on him, or sort of an expectation of first team minutes this next season on him. He is going to not be smashing down Vitor's door to say, I should be starting in this side. There has to be an understanding that João and Andre are going to be there for the foreseeable, and breaking up that pivot is unlikely. But when called upon, he's going to be a very able sort of replacement for either of those two.
Yeah, not a player who's kind of taken my eye before, but when I've always obviously Marseille, a big club, you kind of, if you ever see them playing in a European competition against someone you might be more familiar with, you have a look at their lineups and stuff like that. I've always noticed that he tends to start above probably some more familiar names or the other squad members of the Marseille team. You think, oh, I wonder why. But like you said, he's probably he seems like a really kind of probably more mature, more responsible footballer than others. Does some of the basics really well. I just had a quick look on Wikipedia. I think he captains them as well. So yeah, I guess there's, like you say, probably scope for having someone who's a bit more sedate, maybe in the middle of the park alongside
Mm-hmm.
Andre or João Gomez at times. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually. I think reading through a sort of more contextual stuff around him from this like past season, I believe he actually started on the bench, and whether that's the sort of root of what the issues are between him and the club now, I'm not really up to date with it. But he played himself into the team off of there. And I think actually it'd be quite an interesting dynamic to add into the squad where Zhao and Andre have that player behind them that's sort of just giving them a little nudge every so often to just let them know that they are there and they're very able as a replacement, and see if that takes their games to a different level as well.
No, for sure. Interesting one. Next one, I think.
Yes, Jack Rudoni. If Coventry had gone up, I suspect he wouldn't be on this list. But again, in the theme of being opportunistic, almost being vultures in the transfer market, for lack of a better term, he is. They're expecting to lose him. He's probably the standout from that side, and I'd have him as one of those two sort of tens or whatever you want to call them in behind the centre forward. He's just he. It's for me. It's the versatility to be able to get the ball sort of in his own third and be as comfortable with it as he is in the final third. He's quite physically imposing as well, which is possibly not a trait you see in those sort of 10 roles that often. But it helps him because it helps him ride challenges. And it means that when he's driving at you, it doesn't necessarily look like he's the quickest, but because he's slightly bigger and slightly bulkier, he can ride challenges and make progress and carry the ball like that as a result. I just like him as a homegrown option in behind the striker for that reason. He gets shots away. He's got this almost box crusher sort of not mentality, but ability where he's just in the right place at the right time a hell of a lot. I think there was a lot of key goals that he scored in Coventry's run to the playoffs, where he just arrives on the end of a cross and you don't know where necessarily he's come from, but he's ghosted in, he's unmarked, it's a free header effectively. I can think of 3 to 4 instances when I was sort of doing my video on him where he's done that, and you think that is an invaluable trait to have in any player really. And again, I think I've said the word versatility about 45 times in the space of this hour, but he probably can do a job out wide as well. He's played off the left, he's played in the 10, and he's played in the 8 as well. So just having the ability to mix those positions, if we ever needed to, I think is quite invaluable. And I don't think Coventry, now they're going to be stuck in the Championship, are going to be able to demand the same sort of fee they would have done if they'd come up.
Yeah, I've seen a bit of him, and I think the one thing that really struck me about him is, like you say, getting into on the end of things in the box. I've always thought he looks a bit one-paced, and his numbers are good, and that obviously is eye-catching and stuff like that. The one player that I've always had slight reservations about, who jumped from Championship, a really good Championship player, to the Premier League and hasn't had an impact, was Jack Clark, who at Sunderland looked like a brilliant player, carried the ball brilliantly, would beat people quite with ease at times. The one thing I think you find at Premier League level is that extra little bit of pace and power you need to get a yard on someone and stuff. It's just not there if you haven't got, the athleticism around it. And that's the kind of something about him just puts me off a little bit. So I know a lot of people will like him, and I'm sure at some point a promoted club or a lower half Premier League club will try and take a punt on him. But yeah, it's I'm sure he's got qualities that we could do with though as well. He's left-footed as well, isn't he? I think, and
he is left-footed. I tried to sort of. I know my audience. I know I was talking to you, so I was like, I need to make sure I get some left-footers in here because I know Gully's going to go for them, and then you've hit me with this, and I'm reeling.
No, it's he wears number 5 as well, doesn't he? Which I think great.
I hate that.
Yeah,
I couldn't stand
really
that. It was a tough watch.
Yeah,
I couldn't honestly seeing them in advanced positions, sort of in the box as a 5. I thought, what is going on here? Why is my centre back doing that?
Well, he's not taking the shirt off Marshall Manetzi, is he? Let's be honest.
No, I'm afraid not.
Strike that one off.
I get what you mean. I get what you mean in terms of that transition up from Championship to Premier League is difficult. But I think he is quite multifaceted in the sense that it isn't just going to be a change in pace that's going to make him all of a sudden just be redundant in the side. He can pick up the ball, and when things are a little bit slower, he's got a good delivery. So I saw quite a few
I think he
clips of
takes set
him.
pieces, doesn't he?
Yeah, I was going to say, so set pieces are one thing, and then he will operate in these half spaces where you probably don't expect an incisive pass from him, but it might be that a ball gets whipped into the back post that picks someone out, or clipped in, or whatever it might be. There are quite a few different ways that he affects games, and I think just that might be quite an interesting sort of player to have in the squad.
Okay. We'll go with it. We'll go with it.
So yeah, I think penultimate pick Facundo Buonanotte. This is who I thought you were going to end up with. This was my banker in terms of I was going to have someone else who went this route as well. I looked at the numbers and they aren't anything special. It's if you just looked at his FBref page, you'd think this guy's got absolutely no business playing further up the pitch. Gets you a lot of defensive work, which is good. Because I think one of the points JP made in that first podcast was if you can replace 50 to 60% of Munetzi's running off the ball with someone who's also got a little bit more quality on it, then you do it in a heartbeat. You don't even think about it. But I think the context of being in that Leicester team means that his numbers are always going to be skewed. And I think there was enough when he was at Brighton and that he showed enough glimpses this season that there is a really good player there. I think for me, the parts of his game that I really, really like are just the ability to operate in tight spaces. I don't think Rudoni as a 10 is going to do that job. I think Buonanotte, for example, though, would. I think he can pick up the ball surrounded by 3 to 4 players on the edge of the box. And similar to Hutchinson, actually, shift and shoot, or he's going to be able to slip a pass between the centre-backs or along the side of the centre-back and right-back or left-back, whoever it might be. He's that sort of incisive, slightly more luxury player that is going to unpick a defence that's sat in for 60 odd minutes and we're sat there thinking how we're going to break this lot down. I think he's that sort of player. The shot locations, I look at them, not great. Like again, similar to Hutchinson, there are going to be times where you think what you're doing, picking it up and shooting from there were better options on. But I almost think that's part and parcel of this sort of player is that you take the good with the bad, and for every 7 times he spoons one over the bar, the other 3 he's made a serious difference going forward. I don't availability is my one thing about him. I don't know whether he's going to feature in Brighton's plans or whether he's thought of highly enough down. I say down here actually. I know they are more sort of enamoured with the idea of Enciso coming back from Ipswich, wasn't it? Because he does the eye-catching things. He scores a 35, 40-yarder, and you think he's got to be part of the squad. And I think if that is the case, there's an opportunity here for us to go to them and say, we'll take the probably more technically sound of the two off your hands in that case.
Yeah, they've got so many options in those 4 positions, though. I mean, think about like Brian Gruder, Jorginho, Ruta, like they're probably ahead of him in the pecking order straight away, aren't they? So,
yeah.
I personally think you picked the wrong Leicester player. Out of I think El Khanous is the one out of the 2 of them. It's interesting because it's so strange how he looked really good at thinking to Steve Cooper, Buonanotte, and then Cooper gets sacked and Van Nistelrooy comes in. He barely played at all, and Leicester fans were up in arms about the idea. I think for a long time. I'm always reticent to give a player stick who hasn't played a lot when they come in and don't look good. But then we had the game at our place, and I know he went off at half time because of concussion, but also he just didn't have any kind of sense of impact.
Yeah, he didn't do anything.
Yeah. I know he's clearly got quality, like very evidently got quality, and he's got that kind of Argentinian kind of edge to him, which I like. So he could be really, but like you say, it's whether Brighton have got any sense of a future with him or not. Because he could easily come in and do probably a similar job to Hutchinson would do, where I've considered that. So absolutely the kind of player that we need, though, 100%.
Yeah, and I think when you talk, I mean, you mentioned it a couple of times about the stock of players, where they've come from. I think it's a rare occasion when Brighton miss on a player. They're going to hit more often than they're not, and it seems unlikely that they've picked up Buonanotte from nowhere and he just turns out to be a complete flop. It might well happen, and we may sign him, and you can all come back and laugh at me for knowing absolutely nothing about football, and I'll absolutely take it. But I just think there's enough there in the glimpses that he had at Brighton, and then playing an extremely dysfunctional side like Leicester's this season, where you could mould him into a really decent player in behind the nine. The nine's something I'm going to come on to as well, but yeah, I think he's an interesting shot. I don't think you'd have to break the bank for him either.
No.
I just obviously Brighton are going to drive a hard bargain, but I don't think he's going to take more than 10 to 15 mil, for example.
Okay. No, I think that's a decent shout. But I'm probably bigger on El Khanous than Buonanotte. Yeah.
No, fair enough, mate. Yeah. Fair enough. Well, for the striker, this is a nightmare, this one. It is a guy called Nick Voltemada. And I think, other than proper anoraks, and I count myself in that 100%, but I think outside of that group of fanatic football nerds, he probably would have been a little bit unknown to most. And then he made his debut for Germany like a day or two ago.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, everyone's going, who is this 6'6" bloke up top who he didn't really have I think he was on the pitch for 45 minutes or whatever it might be. He didn't look fantastic. But I can't believe I'm going to have to try and sell the fan base on another 6'6" or 6'7" Bundesliga striker. But I'm here and I'm doing it anyway. From Stuttgart, I'm doing it anyway. I'm doing it. This guy is. I used the term unicorn to describe it. Nori, it's probably overused, but this guy is of that mold. He is 6'6" and plays like he's about 5'8". It doesn't make any sense when you watch him play football. None of it adds up. You would assume 6'6", he is going to be physical. He's going to try and stiff arm centre back, win a header, knock it onto a winger, get in the box, just get on the end of things. He's effectively an attacking midfielder, second striker type 9 that actually wants to drop in a little bit more and get involved with play all over the pitch. His heat map is ridiculous. He picks the ball up similar to how Cunha would sometimes in the left back spot, and then he's there trying to get on the end of the attack. His goal scoring record isn't going to jump off the page, but it was more about his non-penalty XG per 90 was very high. I think it was sort of 85th, 86th percentile across forwards in Europe or whatever it was. And I think just the unique sort of qualities that he brings to the table, he shifts the ball so quickly, it doesn't look like it's possible. I don't want to overhype him too much, but it's almost like a young Zlatan. And a young Zlatan has no right to be playing for Wolverhampton Wanderers. Don't get me wrong. It shouldn't really happen. But there was one clip specific that I saw of him where he's surrounded by 3 or 4 men and he just shifts it from one foot to the other and bursts out of that situation.
I think I've seen the clip. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's those, again, if we're looking into these themes of things that Vitor talks about press resistance and players who are comfortable on the ball, imagine going from Munetsi, with all due respect to him, who doesn't want the ball in basically any scenario, to someone who actively craves it, and when he does get it, has the gravity to bring 2 or 3 men with him. I mean, it just opens up such a variety of possibilities on the other side of the pitch, or even on his side, whoever might be running into the space that he's vacated. The other side of it is that he can play as a traditional 9 as well. He's, every single physical blessing that should come with being 6'6" comes naturally to him. He puts his entire body weight into centre backs. He fends them off, and then he lays it off to a teammate, and he's there trying to get on the end of the cross, whatever it might be. He's this perfect blend of just technical quality that shouldn't really be part of a 6'6" striker's game, and old school can get on the end of a cross and stick his head on it. The worry is obviously these players that are physical freaks, if you like, for lack of a better word, they are prone to injury. We've seen Sasha, and he does have something of an injury record. It's not as bad as it as made out. I think if you look at it cumulatively the days missed or the games missed might not look fantastic, but I think a couple of them are very short-term things that he got over. He played pretty consistently this season. The only other worry outside of that would be fee. And the rumours are that the Bayern were interested, but the idea that they would be interested in would be pick him up and then loan him back to Stuttgart. Whereas there's an opportunity there for someone like us to say, why would you do that? Well, you can just come here and get game time straight off the bat, showcase your talents. And as we sort of made a point earlier in the pod, we've shown ourselves to be pretty forgiving for players who just want to come here, play for a couple of years, and then make their way onto a bigger club. Pretty stiff competition, reportedly. Everton, Newcastle, everyone's supposed to be interested in him. But it is almost a case of pick him up now for 30 to 35 if you can. And in a year or two, he's going to be worth, 40% on top of that. So it's almost an investment as well as what you're getting on the pitch.
No, this one shocked me when I saw him come up on your screenshot there. But I thought for a second you were suggesting that we stick him in ahead of Strand Larsen, because he, from what I've seen of him, he looks the real deal. And like you say, there's some really distinguished clubs that are after him, and I think that far bigger clubs than us potentially are interested in this one, because he could probably go into another club higher up the chain, be a backup striker, but still have a lot of impact because of his ability to do various things. But you see him as a 10.
It almost becomes interchangeable at that point, because he can function as a 10 or a second striker. And even if push came to shove and Vitor said, right, well, we're in a certain game state here, we want to change from the 3-4-3 to something like a 3-4-2 or whatever it might be, he's able to do that as well. So just having that flexibility where he's not, because like you say, I think it would jump out at you if we were to suggest a striker here who's going to challenge for Strand Larsen's minutes. I think he's earned being the starting number 9 now. But I think just in that slightly more withdrawn role, and the fact that I've suggested 2 left-footers in those roles already, I wanted a little bit more balance in there if we wanted to get one of them. It was just a case of that, really, and the flexibility of him being able to play in the 9 as well as one of those 10 positions. So, just having that versatility.
No, I think Voldemort would be a turn up for the books if he showed up at Molineux. I think that's a real statement of intent if we were to sign him. Absolutely.
I've taken the Football Managers thing really seriously. I'm signing who I want. I've got Mbappe on the next slide.
Yeah, in your squad. All right, cool. Yeah. Should we move on to your overall squad then? So see how that's panned out.
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to you here, really. I've kept the same 3. I know there's been some talk about Jose Sarr. I was going to say I'm happy with him. He'll do for the moment. I think there are bigger fires to put out in this squad. Those 3 in goal stay the same with the 2 homegrowns. Back 5, I think that right centre back position, possibly I'd swap Mosquera for Ahmed Hodzic now, just looking at it again. And Bard, he's functioning as a left wing back here in this graphic, but actually he can fill in anywhere from left centre back through to left wing back. So there's that versatility again. Maitland-Niles, who would be homegrown, which is always handy, but isn't there as too much of a blocker to Rodrigo Gomez and Pedro Lima. Andre Tommy Doyle, I'm still, I said it in the first pod, I am a Tommy Doyle fan. I'm sticking with it. I think there's space for him here, and I think the fact that he's English as well just gives him that homegrown status, and it helps us with the numbers. I'm sticking with him. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong, but I can't see that sort of range of passing that he's got being completely invaluable over the course of a 38-game season. The 10 is never going to work. Play him as a 6 or an 8 and let him see what he can do.
Okay.
Rongier's there as the backup to João Gomez. As I said previously, just being able to carry the ball from deep positions, progressing it through the pitch, through the thirds. I think as well, in case there were any injuries or suspensions for whatever reason, he's sat in there as well. The 2 behind the striker sort of explain themselves. I'm sticking with Hwang. I think Guedes got the chances this season that Hwang probably should have had.
Mm.
I'm not sure what we saw from Guedes. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in training to see why Hwang doesn't get a chance in that spot. I know he's easy to berate for the chances he misses and for the lack of off ball or at times on ball sort of value he has to the side. But I'm sticking with him because I think we've seen enough from him to show that he can be a valuable squad player. And that leaves us with Buonanotte and Rudoni coming in to probably take the place, will definitely take the place of Munetsi, and I think one of them will probably interchange minutes with Bellegarde, who has more than made a case for getting good starter minutes as well at times. I've got Voltemada as the 9 here, but as mentioned previously, he can slide into that 10 role or as a second striker, just for an extra bit of flexibility. I've got 24 in the squad. That was not by any sort of plan. I miscounted completely and forgot that under 21s didn't count towards the number. I will own up to it. So I don't know. I'll hold auditions to see who takes up that last spot. But ideally, that's what the squad would sort of take some shape as before the start of the season.
The only question I think I've got is probably the fact that you left Totti Gomez as the only proper left-sided option on the back three. But
yeah, absolutely. But I think that's the point of bringing someone like Bard who can sit in as a left centre back as well. And I realise that leaves you short, and that means that you've got to play Bueno at left wing back, and possibly that's not what you want to do. But if push came to shove, I think you can probably get away with it for a short period of time. Look, if we do lose Totti for a longer period, then I'll look at this squad and think, why did I not just take the plunge on a left-footed centre back? But there is a contingency plan in there that should, touch wood, work out.
No, I think it's especially at the back where you want consistency. You want, if you had to play the same 3 players every single game, you would do it right.
Yeah,
it's not one of those positions where you're going to get substitute minutes like on a regular basis. So having too many players there is problematic in its own way, and just having a bloated squad is problematic in its own way.
mm-hmm.
When you find players kicking cones over in training and booting balls away and stuff because they're not getting any time on the pitch. But I think that's very interesting. I think we've obviously same wavelength on certain things, different one on others, but that was the whole point of this exercise as well. And we're looking forward to seeing JP's when he does, when we do get around to sharing his with everyone. But that's part 2. There will now obviously be a part 3 to bring to you guys. And yeah, really interesting conversation. Enjoyed that, Dan. And you can all obviously have a pop at us when these players inevitably flop later down the line, or tell us how well we've done when they're signed for Wolves and drive us back to the higher reaches of the Premier League. But from me and Dan, for now, that's all. Good night, and we'll speak soon.